Thank you all very much for being here. It's a stunningly beautiful day, and you chose to come in and listen to one of the most exciting topics in the entire universe.
Yes.
However, it is extremely exciting this time of year. But yes, I am a native Austinite. How did I get involved in appraising real estate for property taxes and now advocating for homeowners of property taxes? Well, as for me, I found myself at high school career day, and the counselor looked at me and said, well, Mike, you have two options. You can either be a big and tall supermodel, or you can do this. Obviously, I chose the more glamorous of the two, right? But it is a pleasure to be with you and spend some time with you. My goal in this presentation is to give you the briefest overlay possible so that you will be competent in deciding whether you should protest your property tax valuation or not. Much of what I'm going to say will be relatable, regardless of whether you're in Williamson, Travis, or any other county. Williamson and Travis I know the most about, and if you do have specific questions, we'll be glad to help you at the end. All right, first we have to cover the property tax process. People, this is a very enigmatic and smoky process. All local funding from our taxes are generated through property taxes, particularly county and school district. Now, there are some sales taxes involved with the cities and the counties, but all school district tax, except for the lottery, as well as the vast majority of our local services come from property tax. We all know we don't have a state income tax. So the first step in the process is the taxing entities or units. They create a budget. The school district, AISD, gets together in February and they create a $2 billion budget. No one comes to that hearing, but everyone protests their valuation, right? But that's where it all starts, is at the budget. Now, I'm certainly not knocking the school districts, and if you're not aware of the complications of the recapture system in the state of Texas, when you go home tonight, because we're not here to discuss it, please Google Texas Education Recapture, and you'll learn about some of the things that are affecting our local school districts that they have no control over. All right? The next step in the process, this is the one where everyone gets angry. You get your appraisal in the mail, and you open it up, and you see your value increased a substantial amount, and you know you're going to be taxed on that amount, so you're angry, and on the very next paper, there's a protest form. So then you have to decide whether you're going to protest or not. Well, that valuation comes from your local appraisal district. In Williamson, it's the Williamson Central Appraisal District. In Travis, it's the Travis Central Appraisal District. All right, the next step, and this is the one that people don't realize really takes place, is that tax rates are set. So first you have the budget, that's how big the pie is. Then you have everyone's value, that's your slice of the pie. And then the tax rate gets set to bring in that budget with that value. So there are three steps in the process. The only one of these three that you can individually protest is the one in the middle. And that's why everyone does that. All right, but I do want to, on the next slide, cover, everyone refers to the appraisal district as the tax office. And just to help you, because it'll help indicate to someone that you're doing a protest with how sharp you are. That's not the tax office, that's the appraisal district, okay? In Williamson, it's in Georgetown, right at Southeast and Austin, real close to there. But this one's the Travis one on Cross Park in Austin. That's the tax office in Austin, right? The big building on Airport. So this office, its role is to determine the market value of your property for the purposes of taxation and to administer exemptions. That's their only role. In the tax office, they're the ones that when this process is finished, the tax office and the tax assessor, they do the math to generate the tax rates, and then they collect the property taxes, okay? All right, so let's say you've decided you want to protest your notice of appraised value. Now, each of my slide, I didn't know whether we were Williamson or Travis focused. It's really hard at this location because it's kind of bridges both. Okay, but in each of, if there's a difference, I'll spell it out for you. So if I say anything about Travis, it's the same as Williamson. If it's different, I'll try to mention it. Okay? So if you file a protest, the first step in the process is you will have the opportunity to sit informally with a real estate appraiser at that respective appraisal district. That is the informal hearing, and you are meeting with an employee of the appraisal district. Now, if you can't come to an agreement informally, you will be referred to the Appraisal Review Board, often you hear the initials ARB. The Appraisal Review Board does not work for the appraisal district. It will seem that way because the hearings are often in the building of the appraisal district, but in theory, that is a panel of independent taxpayers. They do not work for the appraisal district. Their job is to equally and fairly administer the tax code. That's exciting, right? I'm not saying it always gets done, but that's their role. Now, people are often very intimidated by the formal hearing. I understand why. I have conducted personally 24,000 property tax appeals and 7,000 formal hearings. I still get nervous the first one of the year. So I understand, okay? But those are the two steps in the process. All right, now let's talk about when you open that notice, how did they come up with that number? It's comfortable to think someone threw a dart at a board. I understand that. It feeds your frustration. People are trying to tax you out of your home and all of that. I understand that frustration. But in order to equip you to protest this and to make sure you are being taxed fairly and equitably, then let's talk about how it actually gets made. There are 3 vessels in your notice of appraised value which hold value. The first one is the improvement. And this is the part that relates to Mike's piece of the puzzle. Okay? Now everyone opens their notice and they see that their improvement value increased. They immediately call either the appraisal district or Shannon. And they say, why did my improvement value go up? I didn't improve my home, right? Yeah, we understand. But bear in mind, improvement only means that there is a structure on that land. Any structure on the land is an improvement to vacant land. That's all improvement means. It doesn't mean you remodeled or added on or anything like that. Second piece is land. That's easy to understand. Your dirt has a value. The third piece, the third vessel that holds value, this is where the voodoo comes in. There's a mass market multiplier, and I'm going to cover each of these, but this is these are the 3 factors that generate that number of market value on your notice. So this first one, and this is the one where your insurance comes in. The value of your improvement is based on the replacement cost new less depreciation, otherwise known as RCN-LD. All right? And what that is a house of similar utility and design. How much would it cost to reconstruct that house? That's the number that's most relevant for the purposes of your insurance, and that's the number that everything starts with in your appraisal. All right? Now, obviously, if you're not new, how much your house was depreciated at the appraisal district is a big factor. And that's why you either need to know how to look at that, or you need an expert to look at that. The second piece is the land. Now, land values, if you live in Travis County or know anyone that owns property in Travis County last year, they went up substantially. There were many neighborhoods where land value had not changed in 15 to 20 years, and they finally corrected them. That caused mass hysteria, and we understand. The way that the land value is determined, if they're doing it the right way, and they usually are, is they will look at vacant land sales. That's pretty easy, right? How much does a lot sell for? But in many neighborhoods, there are no vacant land sales. If that neighborhood's already built out, you don't have vacant land sales. So at that point, they use this next part, abstraction by extraction. That makes you sound really smart if you use that term. All it means, in the simplest way I can explain it, is an appraiser, whether they're a fee appraiser or a mass appraiser, is looking at all these homes that sold in this neighborhood. Let's say a house sells for $1 million. And we know that the replacement cost new less depreciation, that improvement's value to reconstruct is $400,000. Well, someone paid $1 million and the house is $400,000, what's left? $600,000. And that's what the land is worth. That's the only other place to put value. That's all abstraction by extraction means. Take the sale price, take out the replacement cost new less depreciation, what's left is what the land is worth. And to give you an example of how things have gotten so crazy in Austin in the last few years, everybody knows Zilker as a neighborhood, either the park or the neighborhood. Everyone knows where it is. Well, there hasn't been a home sell there in the last 3 years for less than $550,000, even if they tear it down. That's staggering for those of us that grew up here. Okay? But what people don't understand is they think, okay, I'm going to buy this old house for $600,000. I'm going to tear it down. Now my appraisal is going to be less because I tore the house down. No, that's not how it works. When you buy it and tear it down, you just made the land worth $600,000 because your intent was to get to the vacant land. Now that frustrates homeowners, and I understand that, and there are a lot of things to look at as variables. Was that a more desirable location than yours? Was the lot larger than yours? Can you put an accessory dwelling unit on it, but you can't on yours? Are you in the floodplain and they're not? Do you slope? All these other things, right? But the basics of it, when you buy a property and you scrape it, that's what the land is worth. As a matter of fact, general appraisal theory says you should add the amount to demo the house to the land value, but people don't do that. All right, the third piece where the voodoo comes in, the appraisal districts in the state of Texas are specifically by law tasked to use mass appraisal to look at a neighborhood as a single unit. And that's where a lot of mistakes can come in, because they're valuing this one neighborhood or economic unit or market segment, call it what you want, neighborhood is easier. They're looking at a neighborhood as one individual unit, and they say, I'm going to take the sale in the middle. How much did that person pay above this replacement cost new less depreciation to move in there? And I'm going to raise that house value till I hit that number, and then I'm going to raise every house in the neighborhood the same amount. And that's how they create a median level of appraisal. That's a really important term if you ever decide to protest. Everyone in the neighborhood should be at a median level of appraisal. If you're not, if you're above the median, by law you get to be pulled back. I'll cover that, but it's a little bit complicated, but that's the easiest way I know to explain it. All right? So here's how they create that median level of appraisal. Good, we got a real screen so I can use the laser. All right? So you've got a median right here. And if you imagine that this bell curve, let's use Zilker again because everyone just knows it. Okay? Let's say these are all the sales in Zilker from last year. Some of them, they paid a lower premium, right? They're over here. Some of them, they paid a higher premium. They're over here. The numbers that are on this, great, ignore these numbers. The numbers that would be on this bell curve are the appraisal ratio. So in other words, if you take the appraised, I promise this is the last really boring part. If you take the appraised value and divide it by the sale price, you get a ratio, right? So if we appraise it for $500,000 and it sells for $500,000, that's exactly 1.0 or 100%. Does that make sense? If we appraise it for $500,000 but it only sold for $250,000, that's an appraisal ratio of 2 or 200%, and that house was way overvalued. That's what you want to watch for if that's you, okay? The point I want to make about this bell curve is that the law forces the appraisal districts to put everyone in this median. But as you can see, at that point, half the houses are overvalued because half of them are to the right of the median. So when you're done, half of the houses in every neighborhood are overvalued. I mean, it's not their fault. People think they do that on purpose. They have to do it that way. All right, so what our job is to look and see. We have a dozen different ways to identify if you're on that side of that median, and we help pull you back to the median. Okay, it's one of the ways that we do what we do. All right, now the next most important thing, there are 4 values in your notice of appraised value and in the tax code, and everybody gets these confused. If you take nothing else from this discussion, please understand the difference between these 4 values. Because if you don't, you're going to waste your time and make this beautiful 3-ring binder if you protest full of data, and you're going to go up to the appraisal district and find out you were using the wrong numbers. And I don't want that to happen to anyone. So the first number is market value. That is the only value the appraisal district is tasked with appraising. All right? And that is a determination. The tax code gives a really lengthy definition of market value. It is essentially what a property would sell for on January 1st of a given year if exposed to the open market for a reasonable amount of time for a willing buyer to find a willing seller, neither party taking advantage of the exigencies of the other. Both parties know all the uses of the property and both are seeking to maximize their gains. Now that sounds like a lot, okay? Basically it means if you exposed your property to the open market and were trying to maximize your profit, how much would it sell for? And that is the appraisal district's job to determine that number. The next number that will really confuse you, and you'll see it on the websites of the appraisal districts, and you'll see it on your notice of appraised value, is appraised value. You think, well, appraised value, that must be the job of the appraisal district. That must be what I'm protesting. That is absolutely wrong. Make sure you get that. You cannot protest appraised value. What is appraised value? Appraised value is you take that market value, what it would sell for, and then you run that through this sausage grinder that is Chapter 23 of the Texas Property Tax Code. In Chapter 23 of the tax code, how many of you have a homestead exemption? Raise them up. If you don't, you better get one. Okay, good. Part of that homestead exemption is you have a homestead cap. How many of you know about that?
Yes.
Okay, good. Yeah, everybody knows about it now. 10 years ago, no one knew what it was because it didn't matter. Okay, but the homestead cap is separate from the exemption. Make sure you understand that. Your homestead cap sets your appraised value because it says your appraised value may not increase by more than 10% year to year, so long as you don't add new value to the property, such as add on or something. Now the market value can go up or down any amount year to year. And that's the part where everyone gets confused. They see their market value went up 23%, and they will call Shannon again, or they will go to the appraisal district, and they'll say that's illegal. You can't go up more than 10%. Market value can go up or down any amount. Appraised value is limited to a 10% increase if you have a homestead exemption on the property. Okay? So imagine if you're on your block and you're looking at the values of your neighbors. If you moved in last year, right? So your house reset to market value, and your neighbors lived there for 25 years. Their appraised value will be substantially less because they've had a homestead cap in place for 25 years. Yours just started last year. And that's where people get really, really confused, is they start comparing their appraised value to their neighbor's appraised value rather than market value to market value. I just want to save you wasting your time looking at the wrong numbers. When I worked at the appraisal district and would do hearings for homeowners, I would just sit there and wait for that 3-ring binder to be done, and I would simply tell the appraisal review board, every one of those numbers was appraised value. This hearing only has jurisdiction on market value. And all of that time was wasted. Okay, I just don't want that to happen to you. So it also includes your over 65 freeze. I didn't ask anyone to raise your hand if you're over 65. I don't want to get to, okay, we got some new folks back there, but I didn't want to get in trouble. The next value you're going to see is assessed value. All you need to know is that in the state of Texas, appraised value and assessed value mean the same thing and that they are interchangeable. It really doesn't have a meaning, but the tax code did not do a good job of cleaning up these two definitions. They mean exactly the same thing. It's your value after you take your market value and take out your homestead cap or your over 65 freeze. All right? And then the last one, the one you write a check on, is taxable value. Taxable value is after all these other values have gone into effect, then you take out the individual dollar amounts or percentage amounts for each of your exemptions, and then that's what's left to pay taxes on. So there's 4 values, okay? So if you guys were, oh, one more slide before the test. I'm a nerd, so I have to have a Venn diagram in every presentation, okay? Just bear with me, all right? But a lot of people think, I'm gonna go to my realtor, and I'm gonna get the absolute lowest comps in the world, and then I'm gonna roll in there, and I'm gonna present those, and I'm just gonna win. And then as soon as they do that, they find out that the sales they're bringing either weren't open market or weren't arm's length. And those terms are not necessarily the same thing. Okay, a quick example. I can have a sale, say I live in Lago Vista, and I'm trying to sell my house in December. Not a lot of people buying lake houses in December. But I'm getting a little frustrated, I gotta move, or it's been on the market for 3 or 4 months and I've gotta go. Let's say my son offers to pay me 95% of what it's listed at. Well, that could still be an open market transaction because it was marketed for a reasonable amount of time and I maximized my gains, right? So even though I know that person, which means we have a relationship, it means it's not arm's length, right? It could still be open market. Arm's length simply means, did you have a prior relationship between buyer and seller? That's all that means. And in order to be valid, any sale you bring in for your protest should be both of these things, okay? And the best example I can give of a sale that is arm's length but not open market, if you live in Central Austin east of 35 right now, you come home every day and there's a piece of paper in your mailbox. And it says, hey, I'll give you $400,000 cash for your house right now, sight unseen. And those are developers who are going to tear it down, build condos or a new house, okay? They're not offering you full market value. It's not exposed, it's not marketed, but it is arm's length. Those sales are not the best sales to bring. Why? Because neither party is maximizing their gains and it hasn't been marketed. In many cases, that homeowner will have delinquent taxes. And the developer knows that, takes advantage of it, makes them a lowball offer, and that pays that person's taxes and they get a big chunk of cash after that. But don't think the appraisal district won't notice that. They're smarter than that. So ideally, you want to bring in sales that are most like you, but that are open market at arm's length. All right, so here, cover again. Homestead exemption versus homestead cap. What's the difference? Your exemption is a percentage in dollar amount off of what you pay taxes on, and you get that the year you move in. Here's the part that throws everybody off. Your homestead cap, now if you have really ethical and amazing real estate agents like on the flood team, they're going to tell you what I'm about to tell you. But not every real estate agent will. Your homestead cap does not go in place until the year after you buy the house. And what I used to see at the appraisal district is people crying because they would buy a house, and on the MLS, through no fault of the agents, not the agent's fault that that's the number that's on there, it'll say the taxes last year were $3,800. And the buyer assumes that's going to be about what their taxes are. What they don't know is that person that had it last year had an over 65 for 15 years, right? And when you buy it, it's going to reset to full market value. And if it was remodeled between then and now, you're really in trouble. Okay, so just be aware that if you purchase property, or if you know someone who's purchasing property, be aware that that homestead cap is going to reset. So you really need to make sure you protest or get us to help you, and so we can help minimize that impact to you. All right, over 65 freeze, again, that's a ceiling placed on the independent school district property tax. What I want you to know so you can help your family members is it should be in the year you turn 65. So January 1st, 2019 rolls around. If I'm turning 65 in November, I get it January 1st, 2019. I don't have to wait till I'm actually 65. It is in the year I turn 65. Now Travis Appraisal District will automatically do this because they have your state ID from your homestead. They will automatically put your over 65 on unless there's a computer glitch, because they have enough protests, they don't need one for that. Williamson and Hayes, you might want to just make sure. You can look on the website, you'll see it on your notice of appraised value, but you want to make sure. All right? Now remember, here's your test. Those are those 4 values on your notice. Which one of them can you protest? Anyone? Market only. So they both jump up to $450,000 market value in 2018. They both hire us to protest. Okay? We attend the protest, and in both cases, we were able to reduce the market value to $350,000. So it was $200,000 in 17, noticed at $450,000 in 18, and then at the protest, they were lowered to $350,000. All right, House A that has no homestead, they just have a huge tax benefit because they're paying taxes on 100% of market value if they don't have a homestead, right? But look at this, the red number. That person had a homestead. Remember, they were $200,000 in 17, right? Even though the market value can go up or down any amount, that appraised value they're taxed on may only increase by 10%. So they're only going to pay taxes on $220,000 regardless of this protest. The good news is that their homestead cap is helping them more than the protest can. The other good news is that if they had hired us, we would have done all that for free, because we don't charge anyone a red cent until we save them taxes. No one is ever charged based on a market value reduction. We only take a portion. We charge a portion of your tax savings. So if you don't save money, we worked for you for free, and we worked for about 10,000 people for free last year. All right? Should you protest? If you recently purchased your property on the open market and it's appraised less than you paid for it, send a thank you card, not a protest. Okay? And be aware that if you were to attend your appraisal review board meeting, your value could be raised to your sale price. People don't know that. Happened to 96 people in Travis last year. They walked in with that, again, that big 3-ring binder, and they didn't want to talk about their sale price, but the district knew what the sale price was, and the ARB raised them to that value. Okay? Because remember that median we talked about? If the median is 100%, the appraisal review board says everyone else is 100%, you should be too. So we're going to raise it. So don't go in and tell your friends and family don't go in if they're appraised for less than their sale price. Now there are some exceptions. What if you bought the house and there's actually things wrong with it that weren't in the inspection? Right? I mean, that happens, right? If there are some extenuating circumstances, you might still want to protest, or you might want to get some help to protest. Now here's what everybody says when they go to their protest if they just bought, right? I overpaid. You probably did, but so did everyone else in Austin in 2018, right? That's the elasticity of demand. Regrettably, the sales set the market. Okay, it's really hard to get away from that. All right? Should you protest? If you do, and you're looking for evidence, make sure, be objective. Detach yourself emotionally. I know it's hard. It's a huge economic impact on us every year, right? But you've got to detach yourself from the emotional part of this. Look for the sales most like you. Okay? Be objective. And if they are appraised for substantially more than they sold for, you might be overappraised too. Now, if you're doing an equal and uniform appraisal, people don't understand the difference. In Texas, you can appeal your value in two ways. Market, which everyone understands, based on sales. Or you can do an equal and uniform protest. Often that is expressed as an equity protest. When you're doing that, you're comparing yourself to the appraised values of properties like you, rather than sale properties. It's a much more complicated protest, though. All right? And I can't stress this enough, be objective. If you go in with really good evidence, you were objective, you looked at the market value, not appraised value, you looked at houses most like yours, that's your best chance. And if you're going to spend your own time, you want to have the best chance for success. All right? Now, don't forget this part. The deadline to protest your market value in most cases is May 15th. It used to be May 31st. Last year, the legislature changed it to May 15th. Okay? Now, there is an urban legend that we're going to dispel right here. There is no benefit, none, zero, to waiting to file your protest until, I see squinty eyes, until midnight on the 14th. Let me explain the difference. Okay? There is no benefit to waiting to put in your protest, because those protests are usually scheduled based on the value of the properties, not based on the order they are received. Where there can be a benefit is you don't necessarily want to be the first one in to do your hearing. Because if properties are being reduced, then it can create opportunities for your property to be reduced. But those are two totally different things. When you mail in your notice is not going to affect, in most cases, when you're scheduled. It's based on value down. So the most expensive houses generally come in first, and then they end up at the least expensive houses. So what you don't want to do is end up on the 14th of May, and you intended to protest, and you think you need to wait and be the last one in, and now your uncle's in a car wreck, and you go to the hospital, and now you missed your opportunity to protest. Okay? So in addition to that, if you do file your protest timely, and you realize, oh my gosh, this is a lot harder than I thought it was, I don't have time for this, you can still hire someone to represent you, even if you're the one who filed the protest. Okay? We do ask that if you reach out to us, we get at least 2 weeks, preferably 30 days, to put our genius to work for you. If you call us the day before the hearing, we'll be glad to go for you, but we didn't get to look at it very much, right? Okay? But you can still hire an expert. All right, of course, I'm going to pitch our services really quick. Why should you hire us? We mirror, our computer systems at our office mirror the statistical models used by the appraisal districts to value your home. We have a separate one for Travis, a separate one for Williamson, and we piece together a part for Hayes, but Hayes is evolving, and they're under new management, so we're just kind of keeping that as a fluid situation. But for Williamson and Travis, we have a mirrored environment where we can see exactly what, when we plug that comp in, what's it going to adjust to. And we know before we go in. Okay? We can do those complex equal and uniform arguments that I mentioned, those equity arguments. We can compare the value-driving characteristics of your home to the value-driving characteristics of other homes to make sure you're being equitably valued, which is not the same as market. And the Constitution of the state of Texas requires that you get equal and uniform taxation. All right, we do detailed land value analysis, so we can see, based on the differences between your lot and those lots that everyone's paying $750,000 for, is there something different about you where it should be less? And we can quantify that. We do targeted market analysis. Each of our agents, which Shannon and I are both licensed property tax consultants, all of our agents specialize in a particular portfolio. They're very knowledgeable about the neighborhood. They're very knowledgeable about that market. All right? We are the industry leader. You have handouts. In addition to giving you the property tax calendar, it tells you why we're the best at what we do. What I want to make sure I tell you is, you see advertising claims all the time, right? Car, best in its class. Well, the class was 2 cars, right? The statistics that we handed you, the occupational code for the state of Texas requires those claims to be verified before we can use them for marketing. So they are very accurate numbers because we all lose our license if they're not. All right, we only cost anyone money in most cases. There are a few different cases, particularly for some commercial properties or extenuating circumstances. But for almost everyone in this room, we would only ever cost you money if we save you money. We save you time and money. We do all the work for you, and you don't get a single bill from us unless we save you taxes. At the last Monday, I was way down in Kyle giving a speech, so I was focused on Hays County, and one lady said, best check she ever wrote, because she saved a ton of money. All right, let's talk about if you're going into the CAD on your own, okay? Everybody thinks that's what the appraisal district does, all right? Throwing dart at a board, not even looking. They're lazy government workers, or they just raise values every year to tax people out of their homes. Okay, I will tell you that the appraisal district is no different than any other organization. There are good and bad people, there are smart and not so smart people, there are really great people and not so great people. They're no different from any other organization, okay? And they're trying in most cases to do the right thing, but I described at the front of this why the system handcuffs them a little bit. All right, but this is what you're walking into with your 3-ring binder if you go to Travis. For 2019, they've already inspected 50,000 residential properties. They pull a ton of permits, they get a ton of data mining information, and they go out to 50,000 properties. They will have analyzed and qualified 25,000 sales, so they know about the 2 you're going to try and sneak past them. All right? They value about 1,200 neighborhoods. Last year will probably be about the same. In other words, they increased value in about 1,200 neighborhoods last year. And they conducted about 125,000 residential protests last year. So you're walking in with your 1 into that. So my only point is make sure you bring the best evidence or let us do it for you. All right? Here's the other most important CAD myth. And when I did work at the appraisal district, this is what I would hear all the time. Why don't you just stop raising values? Just stop. That's all you have to do. Stop. Okay? Here's what people don't understand. The state comptroller conducts a property value study called the PVS every other year in each county. Here's what it looks at. It looks by school district, and it makes sure that the appraisal district is valuing properties between 95 and 105% of what they're selling for. If they're not in that range, then that school district loses state funding. No one knows that. Did you guys know that?
No.
Told you, okay? That's why the appraisal district are not just evil and nefarious people. If they don't try to value at market value accurately, school funding is put in jeopardy. All right? No one knows that. Now, mass appraisal does have its flaws, but it can be accurate, particularly if you're in a homogeneous neighborhood, and that's why you need even more technical tools at your disposal. And here's my favorite term. Everyone goes into the appraisal district. They see the appraisal district has all these sales. One of them might be theirs. And they scream out, that's illegal. You can't know that. This is a non-disclosure state. Texas is a non-disclosure state, right? That means when I buy or sell real estate, I cannot be compelled to divulge that sale price. It is not illegal for the appraisal district to be given that sale price or find it out through data mining. That's not illegal. All right? So, I'm going a little faster because I'm falling behind. I apologize, but you all look interested. Must be probably the sandwiches, though. All right? What I want you to know what you're up against. If you don't bring in comparables that are like you, what you'll see is the appraisal district's going to run it through the little program and adjust them, and you're going to wonder why it didn't help you. And what they're using is there is a section of the tax code that says no matter who you are, if you protest and you bring in comps, they have to be adjusted. All right? And you got to bring in sales that are at the tax code's definition of market value. Right? Here's what everybody brings in. They'll bring in the crack slab sales. There'll be 2 in the neighborhood. And the appraisal district can always tell because the bottom third of the MLS is cut off. The part where the notes say crack slab. Right? They hand them over, and then the appraisal review board member will say, why is this cut? Oh, saving paper. Okay? They know that, all right? Or people bring in courthouse auctions or tax sales, and I'm telling you what, whatever she told me to do, I would do. She does not look like she's messing around. But courthouse step auction sales are not going to be the best evidence of market value unless those are the only sales in the neighborhood. All right? So here's the last part I want you to know you're up against, and I underlined it. If you bring in comparables for your protest, the tax code states that any person, not just an employee of the district, the adjustments for those comparables must be based on the application of generally accepted appraisal methods and techniques. If you don't do that, the appraiser is going to read that line and negate your work if you just do a pure price per square foot analysis. Let me show you what I mean really quick. All right, this is what happens all the time. You own this little house in Terrytown. Lucky you. I'm in Elgin. All right, your neighbor owns this much bigger house. And you decide, you know what, they valued me at $200 a square foot, but this big house is only $100 a square foot. Equal and uniform, you gotta lower me. They live right next door. Are you adjusting for the fact that that house is substantially larger? No. Does it cost more, all things being equal, to build a smaller house than a big house? Yes. It does, per square foot, not total. But this is what everyone does. They bring in just one raw per square foot number, don't account for anything else and think they won. They didn't. And then this is the other most common example. You see this all over Central Austin, right? Somebody builds the new McMansion, and then they bring in the house next door that's 40 or 50 years old, fully depreciated, not even as expensive to begin with, and they want to be adjusted to that house, and they just look at a per square foot number. That's not going to work. They're too sophisticated for that, okay? That's all I want you to know. The guy with a pool wants to be valued the same as the one without a pool. Saw it every time. The person with a city view wants you to ignore that they have a city view. The one on Mount Bunnell Road, has anyone ever been, not just on Mount Bunnell, but over on Mount Bunnell Road? You know there's a water treatment plant across the street, right? Okay, here's what I saw every year. The ones on this side of the street that have a view of the lake want to be valued the same as the ones across the street that can only see the treatment plant. Imagine that, right? Never heard that one before. And the guy that has lake access, of course, he doesn't want you to look at that when he's there for his protest. All I want you to know is Travis and Williamson are more sophisticated than this. They understand these things. That's all I want you to understand. Okay? Now, here's my last best important point. Let's say you're one of these properties. Now, these are really graphic examples so that you understand the point. Let's say you're a dilapidated house, or you live next to the railroad tracks, or you live in the floodplain, or you live next to a dump. You don't need an expert to tell you that there's a characteristic affecting your property. You don't need an expert for that, right? You don't need an expert to tell you, you probably need to fix that. You don't need an expert to tell you that there's railroad tracks right behind you. What you do need an expert for is what's the market impact of that characteristic. Because you're probably not going to get as big a reduction as you should if you don't know that number. So what we will do is we will look across 3 years, because the tax code says you can look 36 months, but then it says you have to time adjust. We will look at these properties that are on the railroad tracks. What are the 5 houses that sold that aren't on the railroad tracks that are just like them? What are they selling for? Then we see, oh, there was one on the railroad tracks that sold in 3 years. How much less did they pay? Well, that's how much you should be reduced. And it's that market analysis that creates the difference between a trivial reduction and a market-derived reduction. So you don't need an expert to tell you those things are there, but you need an expert to tell you about how much that's worth. And that's what we're for. All right? And I'll add in one more on the floodplain issue. Remember I started with Zilker neighborhood. If you're in Zilker in 16, 17, 18, or 19, this doesn't matter. No one's paying less because of the floodplain. So when you bring that in as your evidence, the district has an entire workup that shows no one's paying less because of the floodplain. Now, if you live on Onion Creek or in Lake Travis, it might be a little different, right? But I don't want you to bring in the wrong argument. We've already done all that work. Okay? The last part really deals with equity, but I think we covered it well enough, and we've kind of exceeded our time. And I want to make sure we cover this last part. If you do go in on your own, please don't say any of the following, because you're going to get a conditioned response from the Appraisal Review Board. It isn't that these things aren't sometimes relevant, but you'll get a conditioned response because they hear it all the time. Don't give them, I'm this per square foot, they're that per square foot, therefore lower me. Right? You got to bring in the stuff most like you. All right? Don't bring a CMA. The appraiser's going to point out you can't use that to get a loan. All right? Don't talk about your cracks in the driveway. Congratulations. The guy that just bought an $11 million house at the bottom of Mount Bunnell has cracks in the driveway. All right? My fence isn't painted. Never heard that one. all right? My yard slopes, it's called the hill country, all right? I overpaid, my taxes are too high, and definitely don't lead with that. Now you can get to it, but don't start with I'm a real estate agent, okay? Not because it's not relevant, but because the appraisal review board is conditioned. Sometimes that slope does matter. Sometimes I overpaid matters if you're not at the median, okay? So sometimes these things matter, but these are the things, as soon as you say them, this is what the appraisal review board hears, anything else you say. Wah, 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 wah. I mean, they're done, okay? It's like Charlie Brown's teacher. So, or average anything, because the appraiser will point out, tax code says you're not supposed to look at the average, you're supposed to look at stuff most like you. All right, that pretty much concludes, other than I'm gonna say, we are the best at what we do, but I'm going to let you be grown up enough to look at your literature to figure that out. What I do want you to understand is one part, and that is, my clicker will keep up here. Not only do we get the best reductions, we don't charge the most. So if you take the average $500,000 house in Central Austin, Texas Pro Tax would save them, in the average appeal, we save them about $500. That's how much they kept. Okay? And each of our competitors, they kept less, and in some cases substantially less. Because A, some of those people charge more than we do, and B, they don't do as good a job.
So when you talk about some like derogatory property conditions, things like railroad tracks and things like that, what about things like I back to Parmer, right, or a busy road, or I have a power power supply in my backyard, or I have a view of the apartment complexes behind me, which for those of us that kind of live a little more suburbia, less central, yes, those are the kinds of things that we deal with in our neighborhood.
Sure, and all of those things that Laurie's describing are considered to be economic influences on your property value. That simply means forces outside of your property that affect your property. They are most often busy traffic or commercial influence, or if you live next to a crack house, right? I mean, it happens. So somebody's got to live next to them. But I do want to mention, the hardest thing about that is, again, how do you quantify how much that reduction should be? You might walk in with that information and the district might say, okay, well here, we'll lower it 10,000. A, they might not put that on for every year. They might only do it for that year. And B, how do you know that's enough? And that's where you need to really know what's the influence of that. In some cases, there's no influence. You're arguing over the wrong thing. That's another thing. We like to only bring arguments to the table that we know are market deterrents, right? Because we are advocating for you. But there was one more part of that, I don't want to miss it. But that definitely happens everywhere. And because you're valuing that neighborhood as a unit, right? It's not the appraisal district's fault. It can be difficult to fine tune to that degree. And that's why when you protest, you actually detach yourself from that model, and the district has to look at you as an individual property. And that's what enables you to make changes for that. Also, the physical condition of your home. You know, if your home is in below average condition, that is relevant. Or if you've had mold damage or something, or roof problems or foundation issues, those are relevant. Okay?
Yeah, my question was along that. If you have an investment property and you've had hoarders,
right,
that just trash the place,
yes.
Do they, according to that, or like, I mean, you know, like.
Of course, it would be difficult for me to guarantee a result in any particular case, right, but what I will say is that in most cases that should be relevant, particularly if that was the condition of the property on January 1st. Okay. That's going to be the key term, right? What some people do that they make a mistake is, oh, I fixed it in November. Oh, so you're telling me on January 1st it was not in that condition? Oh, well, yeah. Okay, then it's not relevant. So you got to be careful of that. But that should be a relevant factor. And what's really nice about if you're an expert is if you don't get your way at the informal, you attend the formal hearing. If you don't get your way at the formal, you can recommend to the owner that we go to binding arbitration. There's a whole other process that we can do for you that doesn't require lawyers or anything like that. So not only should, in many cases, should that be a factor, but we will advocate whether you should keep going up the line and let us do that for you. And again, no expense until you save taxes. So.
Real quick, well, in Austin, anything you put on the market, no matter how inflated, is going to almost sell. So
sure,
how do you go in and protest that you put this duplex on the market, oh, you know, if you put it on the market, it would sell for 800,000, but you're saying it's worth 500,000.
Right, sure. Well, but here's the thing, I'm gonna use multifamily since you brought that up.
Okay.
So duplex, triplex, fourplex. Most of the duplex, triplex, fourplexes selling in the city of Austin are either remodeled a little bit, or they're gonna be scraped and become condos. That's almost universally what happens, okay? Well, then the district should be recognizing that the use of the property, if you have a standard duplex, is not the highest and best use of that property. Because when they do sell, they're either remodeled or scraped. So there's a whole argument of economic
And
obsolescence.
they don't give you any credit for providing housing? I mean, you know.
Regrettably, I understand.
Okay.
And it would be nice if you could demonstrate that you were at lower than market rents. Unfortunately, that's not within the appraisal district capability. Okay, I don't want to blame them for being blind to that. They're not supposed to factor that.
Are you adding any appraisal value for short-term rentals, things that are licensed as STRs?
Sure. The appraisal district in Austin is trying to look at that, particularly accessory dwelling units, granny flats or whatever. But they can't always know if that's present. So sometimes if you have a property that doesn't have an accessory dwelling unit, you might be overvalued because a bunch of the ones that sold did have accessory dwelling units. But you're on the other side of the coin. All right, but I'm helping the other ones.
Thank you. Okay.
Yes, sir.
Okay, so I'm asking this question for a friend.
Uh-oh. Oh, never heard that one. No, yes,
Let's
sir.
just say, for example, that a wife and a husband own a duplex,
Yes,
and they live in one side and they work on the other side.
yes.
And they've been taxed, and there's a homestead over 65 exemption for both of them. They share an exemption.
Sure.
Now, all of a sudden, they move out of they stop using half of it as an office, and they rent it to somebody who pays them rent.
Yes.
And then just at that moment, they get a reappraisal.
A reapplication.
Reapplication.
Yeah.
And suddenly, instead of owning 100% for a homestead,
It's 50.
it's 50. So how do they base the increase?
Great question. And to back up just a little bit, I considered moving into a duplex so that I could get kind of half of the benefit of each, right? I considered moving into a duplex so I could get a homestead on my side and rent out the other side and basically pay for it. But to your question, in that case, the appraisal district would be doing what they're supposed to be doing. A lot of times, you'd be surprised, a lot of times it's neighbors letting them know. You know, the neighbors go, oh, they're getting a benefit I'm not getting, I'm gonna rat them out. I'm not saying that's the case in your friend, but I'm saying that's often what will happen. And in that case, that is actually accurate. When a portion of the property is being used to generate revenue, in most cases, then it should fall off the homestead. There are some exceptions. I think bed and breakfasts, if you can demonstrate that, you know, it's a bed and breakfast kind of situation or a Airbnb situation where it's not a fully, you know, not completely rented out all the time, sometimes then you should keep that homestead. So there are some gray areas depending on how you set it up.
But then if it goes back into, if we move back in both sides and
Right.
rent it out, et cetera, then our new exemption would be based on the new year.
That's
not
correct.
the old year.
Particularly on the other half.
And is
It would
there-
reset,
Okay.
yes.
And is the reset based on a 2-year lag?
I hear what you're saying. If you can demonstrate that you're leaving the property for 2 years, you can suspend, we're asking some advanced questions here. You can suspend your homestead cap if you show that you're gonna be gone. Problem is, if they can demonstrate it was generating revenue, that's not the same thing. But I hear what you're saying.
So my question is, what is the consequence of losing half the homestead exemption? Financially, I mean in dollars.
Half of it would be taxed at full market value and half of it will be the homestead cap.
Thank you.
Sure. Anybody else? Yes.
Are the median values for neighborhoods published somewhere so you can find out what that is?
Great question. Published? No. It can be requested. I will say this, last year, up until last year, I have no idea what will happen this year. But up until last year, if you own property in Travis County and you requested the evidence, they are very good about proactively sending you what they're going to present at the hearing. And in there, you will get, it'll say neighborhood analysis at the top, and it will show all the sales, and you'll see one of them says 100%, and that's the one they raised the median to. And you'll see everybody else, half of them are above that, and half of them are below that. But they won't necessarily be in that order. And in Williamson, it's much harder to get that information.
So, and second question, if on your tax appraisal that you get, say in April or whenever.
Sure.
If the market value is, say, less than what you know, you could probably sell your house for, should you just keep your mouth shut?
Depends, no, because remember that equal and uniform comes into it too, right? So what if, let's just take a hypothetical. Let's say you're appraised at 5% less than you know you would sell for, but what if all your neighbors are appraised at 10% less than they would sell for? At that point, you're not being equally appraised because even though none of you are at full market, you're closer than they are, see? So there are arguments to be made even if you know you might sell for more. But that is the first thing to look at, for sure. Great question.
So could you talk a little bit more about where the sales data comes from that they use? Because we obviously tell our clients, hey, don't show that to anybody, don't write it down anywhere, don't go to Zillow and report it.
Right.
Because that's the first thing that somebody will pull up if you go and do a tax.
Yes, the best information that I can give you is the Travis Appraisal District is going to have 25,000 sales. ABOR MLS does not grant, as I'm sure you also mentioned, ABOR MLS does not grant access to Travis Central Appraisal District. Some appraisal districts in the state do have access to that. However, there are various data mining techniques, and I'll tell you the most common, probably the most common source of that information are other owners. They will turn you in as comps that they get from their real estate agent. Or not necessarily the real estate agent, from a neighbor, friend, off the internet, and they'll just bring those in. So, and it might even lower their value, but it doesn't help you, okay? And like I say, I do want to make sure that we're not being abusive here. The appraisal district has a very difficult job, okay? And the only way they can do that job is with sales data. There are 3 methods of appraisal, but they all require sale prices, all right? So the key though is, what you should really focus on is that they're having to value that neighborhood as a whole. And think of an iceberg. The stuff that sells is the tip, that's what you see, right? But 90% of it's under the water. Do the two look like each other? No, that stuff under the water is murky and cloudy and dirty and not as pretty, right? And often you're not as pretty as the stuff that's selling. So compensating for those differences between that which sells and your property is very relevant to this process and is probably one of the most important keys. Because when I did work at the Travis District, I would listen to homeowners come in and say, look, I don't look like this. All these houses in Allendale, they're all stripped to the studs remodels, and I'm 1978, you know. And yeah, you need to account for that. And those are some differences. Even in pretty new homes, if you live in a suburban tract home neighborhood, let's say some of them are built in 2005, and some of them are built now. It's very difficult for a mass appraisal model to see the difference between an 05 house and a 2019 house. But which one do people want? The 2019 house. But it's really hard for a mass appraisal model to get the difference between houses that are very similar, but not of the exact same age. So there are a lot of avenues for us to look at. But other than that, that's the most common source of the sales data. And the appraisal district does have a lot more than you think in every case.
What if you have a street where, okay, there are, let's say, 8 properties on a street,
Sure.
and that constitutes a neighborhood?
Okay.
Well, let's say that 2 or 3 of the houses on the street, the owners never protest their
yeah.
taxes.
Right?
And their taxes just went up as much as the appraisal district said.
Sure.
Every year, it was, you know, years back.
Sure.
Is there anything that you could do for the whole street? In other words,
Right.
if everybody on the street were to take a look, would that help everybody or anybody?
Absolutely, and really what you're expressing is you'll create more equity in the neighborhood if you have more people effectively protest. And I think that if I paraphrase, that's what you're saying. So we do have a lot of folks that call us and we encourage them to say, have your neighbors sign up. If they have nothing to lose. If we don't save them any money, they don't cost any money, but if we do, it will generally help the entire neighborhood more. I'm going to go to that gentleman because he hasn't asked a question. Yes, sir.
It's a simple question of, I'm paying tax on the total assessed value, And that's after homestead is calculated?
Correct. That's after your homestead cap. Yes.
It becomes, and I've owned a house in this neighborhood for 3 years. Every year it becomes more and more difficult because now I'm trying to get the market value.
There's a big gap.
It's a huge gap. I'm
Yeah.
trying to get it below the assessed and I don't think I can.
Right. Well, in that case, I mean, it sounds crazy, but in that case, your homestead cap is protecting you more than any market information can. And like I said, what's key though is if you will hire someone like us to continue to watch it, as those numbers get closer and closer together, we're making sure that that market value is always as low as it can be. And in the years it doesn't go below, it doesn't cost you anything. But we keep an eye on it.
Why don't they warn people when you get married that you lose one?
Yeah.
I've known that, we just had a ceremony and never gotten it.
Yeah, and there used to be a joke about that.
It's just regressive.
Well,
It's
I think we called it the sin
values.
tax. Because you get married, you stop living in sin, and you lose a homestead.
It's
Yeah.
really disgusting.
And it gets really unfortunate with surviving spouses, if you have elder family members. Surviving spouses who are receiving an over 65 or disabled veterans exemption, if they remarry, they lose it. So you gotta live in sin.
And in Houston, if they're in a nursing home, they lose the exemption. I don't know about Austin.
Right, but no, those are local based, but you're right. I'm sorry, you had another question.
We just want to put on your federal income tax if you're single, such as I am, you
Right.
really get.
Yeah, well, I'm in the same boat.
You know, anyway.
I'm in the same boat.
Yeah, so if you're, say you live in, you know, obviously live in a neighborhood and some houses are well-maintained and have nice yards and other houses not so much, is it better to?
I understand what you're saying. Is it better to let your place go to?
Right, exactly, right.
Unfortunately, that isn't something that a normal appraisal model is going to look at because it's generally not extremely expensive to repair most of that. In that case, it's not factored into most models. Landscaping, and as a matter of fact, be careful about trees. I'll end on landscaping with this. Be careful with trees. If you come in saying I have a ton of trees, so I can't build out. The number one most desired trait of a central Austin home is density of mature trees. So don't bring that up. But great question. Unfortunately, it doesn't have a huge impact. Yes, sir.
Yeah, I lived in my house for 27 years, and it's getting old and get a lot of damage.
Yes.
So the first time I went to the protest, I saw the picture, just like you said, they agree to reduce some value. And the next year they say, well, I need the real appraisal from some professional, written on the paper.
Right.
I have not done that. What is suggestion? Have you encountered some kind of that case that for protest or not? Or you take care of that cases?
I have two answers. The one is if you're doing it yourself, the appraisal district is going to want you to bring in what's called cost to cure. You might have heard that term. They're going to want to see how much is it going to cost to repair that specifically. Now that's not the same as having to get a fee appraisal because a fee appraisal can be expensive, right? However, if you don't do it yourself and you hire someone else to do it, what we would do is you have a luck of the draw. There are 40 residential appraisers in Travis County, about 20 in Williamson. And you end up with the wrong one, you're going to have a bad day. Well, we know that, and we'll just keep going, right? If we aren't successful because the person is opposing what we're saying, we have a valid issue, and they're not wanting to meet with us on it, we'll just take it to the appraisal review board. So we can know from our experience whether we're not going to settle for that. We're going to keep going, right? We have many thousand to compare it to instead of just one.
So you need some person coming to the house, do a real assessment?
If they give you a bid on how much it would cost to repair, that can be very helpful. Yes. Yes, great question. Anyone? Oh, okay, yes, sir.
So I live in a new house about a year now, and it's still a new neighborhood in Williamson County, and then they're still building.
Yes.
The builder. So we get taxes for the land because they don't know what's going on at the time, I believe, and then we got supplement taxes weeks ago.
Right.
So they just estimate prices is like more than 25% higher than the appreciation. I mean, so now I got like 2 or 3 of my neighbors got the same amount although we have a different house sizes.
Sure.
So how the district kind of, we
Well,
work with that?
That's a very complicated question. The best way that I can answer it is make sure you're looking at the market values and not the appraised values, because those homestead caps will matter, right?
Yeah, it's still the builder has the same list, I mean, same house.
Okay, well, and also then keep in mind that a builder has a special valuation. If a builder or a developer owns properties in a county, the state legislature has provided for what's called inventory valuation. And that means they're taxed at a tiny fraction of what they're actually worth, and they're pretty much usually the same, because the state wants to encourage building. And if you think, if I went out and built 1,000 houses and I'm going to have to pay taxes at full market value on all of them, I'm not going to do that. So there's a carve out in the tax code for developers and builders for when they own it, what it's valued at.
No, what I'm saying
Oh, I'm
is-
sorry.
Sorry, what I'm saying is, so the builder, say like a number like 300, the same house, my house. Mine is kind of like, say, they appraised for like 400. Although it's the same, my plan is a 300 right now. They're selling
Okay,
for
you're saying it's appraised for much more than they're
Yes,
selling for?
Yeah, way more, yeah.
Okay, well, there's one factor in there. Williamson will create a time adjustment. So it depends on when that property sold, and we are able to back that out and look at that. But if it is overappraised, then you need to protest. That's the best answer. If the things that are most like you are selling for less, then that's why you should protest. And a lot of time, I want to say one more really important thing for those of you in builder neighborhoods. In many cases, the highest sales in a builder neighborhood are going to hit the MLS. Why? Because they want all the fee appraisals to come in, right, and get the loan. So if you do live in a builder neighborhood, a lot of those sales aren't hitting MLS. So you want to bring those in if they're lower, and that's how you'd be reduced.
One last question.
Yes?
I've protested property taxes in like 4 Texas counties, and everyone's a different thing. But I have a question. If you get an appraisal, a private appraisal in Austin right now, how close is that to put on the market? How close is that to what the county appraisals are? Because in other counties, it's exactly the same, but not necessarily here. How is it here?
It really depends on the neighborhood, and it depends on that, in theory, I will say this. The presence of a fee appraisal shifts the appraisal district's burden of proof from preponderance of the evidence to clear and convincing. What that means is, if you send in a fee appraisal 2 weeks before you come in for your protest, you have to do that. It shifts their burden of proof, and it becomes a much more important piece of evidence. That's my best answer.
No, but if I have a property right now and I want to put it on the market, do
Right.
I want to go hire a private appraisal, or can I just put it on the market pretty close for what the market value?
I would seek advice from your real estate agent, because they're going to know that particular spot and that particular property is what's it worth. I definitely defer to the experts on that.
I would add also, if for marketability, don't rely on what the appraisal district value is.
It's just amazing, when we have an appraisal in Hidalgo County, they come out exactly the same.
For the online appraisal,
Yes.
you just put your property in there, they just give you I'm not sure how that works, but last year I did 2 of our properties, and they gave me a reduction on one of them for no reason. I thought they were fine, I just wanted to test it out.
Yep.
They actually gave me a reduction. Is there any danger that they could actually raise it for some reason? Or?
Sure, you're talking about if you e-file, electronically file your protest.
Yeah.
At the informal level, the appraisal district is not permitted to increase your tax burden without your consent.
Okay.
So that's the best answer.
Even if you don't want to protest, you think it's fine, you might as well just put.
Yeah, you can send it in, you have nothing to lose.
Okay.
Nothing to lose. Great question. Now, if everyone did that, the whole system would fall apart, but yes, you have nothing to lose. You have nothing to lose. All right, great. Any other questions? Well, we certainly do thank you all very much for hosting us. Thank you very much for Mike for coming out here, for Laurie for hosting us. Thank you, Shannon. Thank you, Mark. Everybody have a wonderful day.
Thank you, I learned a lot.
Thank you.